angel of death literally passed over, and the people were saved. So how were they saved? They were saved by trusting in God's promises. Which, by the way, TP does not stand for that stuff that you roll people's house with. It stands for trusting God's promises. So, just wanted to point that out. Moving right along, Mount Sinai is the next story. God does deliver the people of Israel. And he brings them to Mount Sinai. And there's three kind of cluster of three stories that I really want us to note here. The first is that God makes a covenant with his people. He says, I will be your God if you obey me. The problem is they didn't obey him. So we have this impossible covenant. And because they were wicked and they didn't obey him, the next thing that I want to point out is that God resided on top of Mount Sinai, where the people were to remain at the base of the mountain. There was a border of rocks that circled the mountain, and they were not allowed to cross the border of rocks because of their wickedness. And so we see that God's on the mountain is God's presence, and then man's wickedness. Now, if you've ever seen a movie that has Charlton Heston in it, you'll know that God gave them this thing called the Ten Commandments. And there's a lot that we can talk about with the Ten Commandments. The basic point that I want you to get from this is that the Ten Commandments were very, very strict rules of which no one could actually attain. No one could actually follow through the rules. We know from other places in Scripture that the Ten Commandments says that thou shalt not commit adultery, right? But if we look at a woman lustfully, we've committed adultery in our heart. We speak murder with our mouth, so thou shalt not commit murder. We have not loved the Lord our God with all our heart, all of our soul. So basically, we have these commandments that are things that we are supposed to do, and as we try to do them, we try to build our way back by doing them to God. But the problem is we're not able to fulfill all of them because of this issue. Because we still have this issue because of disobedience. And so we're not able to get our way back to God. So the stairway to heaven, thank you, Led Zeppelin, that one doesn't really work. So now we're in this place where we've got sin in our life, and we recognize it, but we can't escape it. So the question now is, how do we escape this? So how are people saved? They're still saved by trusting in God's promises. They're still waiting on the deliverer, because there's no way for them to work into God's pleasure. This next story is a very significant one. Immediately after God reveals to them they are evil, he gives them the tabernacle. He gives them the tabernacle for the purpose of showing them how they are to approach the holy God. So in the tabernacle, there is the Holy of Holies, and then there's the most holy of holies, the most holy place. Holy, holy, holy. So, God also gave them during this time a command for the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement, on the Day of Atonement, a guy would take an unblemished substitute sacrifice. He would take an unblemished lamb. He would shed the blood of that lamb on behalf of all the nation. So, and then he would take that blood and he would put it in a pan, and he would take it into the Holy of Holies, into the holy place. Take it into the holy place, and he would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat. And then God would have mercy on the nation of Israel for a year. So God provided a way out for a year, a temporary solution to the problem. There were three things that needed to be there for this to happen. One, God couldn't be there in the tabernacle. Two, there needed to be an unblemished substitute sacrifice. The high priest of God to perform the duty of actually sacrificing the animal on behalf of the people. So we see that this actually staved off God's wrath for a year, but it wasn't a full solution. So how were they saved? Still saved by trusting in God's promises, but waiting still on the deliverer. There's several other stories that I could write up here. Just for time's sake, I'm going to keep going. 2 Samuel, though, gives us another glimpse into what the deliverer would be like. He would be a forever king on a forever throne. Isaiah 52, I'll just write this. Isaiah 52, 53 gives us a very clear picture of what this deliverer would look like. It says that he would be despised and rejected by men, so he wouldn't come in this kind of celebrity fashion. He wouldn't be a celebrity, he would be despised and rejected by men. He would be wounded, so he would deal with pain, but that by his stripes we would be healed. So, despised, wounded. So, this is kind of where I want to pause for a second with this. So this is really what we have in the Old Testament in the Bible. We'll fast forward to the New Testament tonight where we got some guys, some shepherds in a field, attending to their flock, and some angels come to them, and they say, behold to you, this day is born a deliverer, and he is good news for all nations. He's good news for all people. So these angels are speaking about Jesus, who we have written about in the Gospels in the New Testament. And so the interesting thing about Jesus is that he wasn't some spirit, he wasn't some entity that came out of nowhere. He was a guy. He was born, he was a seed, born of a woman. So he was a seed, he was a man, he was born as a baby, grew up. We know from the Gospels, he lived a perfect life. Now keep in mind, once again, I'm not trying to argue anybody's belief, I'm not trying to create any controversy. All I'm doing is simply telling you what the Bible teaches, and this is what the Gospels teach. He showed power. Power over Satan. Luke 4, Mark 1, Satan tries to tempt Jesus, and he has power over Satan. He shows power over nature. He commands the waves of the sea to calm, and Luke 8, Mark 4, he has power over sickness. He has power over death. John 11, he raises Lazarus from the dead. So another thing that he did that was very interesting was he accepted worship. Who can accept worship but God? Who can accept worship but God? And actually, God cursed people who try to receive worship in his place. He forgave sins. Who can forgive sins but God? Another thing that the Gospel teaches is that he willingly died. And that he rose. And that hundreds of people, of his disciples, actually went to their death convinced that he rose from the grave. So this is the story of Jesus. And as you can see, as you're probably already putting together, Jesus is a deliverer. You can actually read my handwriting. So now we find ourselves here at the foot of the cross. Really, this is where we are. You may have heard the verse John 3:16 a lot and thrown around and saw posters and all that kind of stuff, but it really is a significant verse. It says, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever should believe in him, put their faith in him, trust in his promise, would not perish, but have everlasting life. So here we are. We'll draw a couple of people. We're at the foot of the cross, and if we believe in God, we shall have everlasting life and be restored back to right relationship with God again. So we can find ourselves back where we belong. But John 3:18 is also very important because it says that if we reject this, if we reject God, then there's another option for us. Like I said before, God didn't create us as robots. We were created pre-programmed for what to do. We actually have minds. We're intelligent human beings. We can make choices. So we can actually choose to reject. So John 3:18 says that for those who reject, there will be hell, which they would deserve, and they would receive condemnation. So this is basically kind of the story of everything leading up to this point. Now I want to tie a few things together. In Revelation, it says that Jesus will create a new heavens and a new earth. So for any of you that have issues with why there are problems and turmoil and chaos on the earth, and you feel like that's God's fault, know that that's not God's intention, that this was the result of a fall, that God has been working throughout all of history to restore things into right order, and that ultimately that He will create a new heavens and a new earth. There will be no more pain, there will be no more suffering, there will be no more of those things. So just to tie all of this together really, really quickly, we talked about in the beginning God spoke. God used His Word. John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:14 says, and the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. So this is Jesus. Jesus is the Word that was actually present in the beginning. We can see that Genesis 1 is fulfilled in Jesus is the Word. Genesis 2, He overcomes sin and death. And He is the restorer of our right relationship with God. He is the covering for our nakedness. In Genesis 3. And He's also, like I said, the seed of a woman. He's not an entity, He's not a spirit. He's the seed of a woman. So that is also Genesis 3. Genesis 4, as opposed to Cain, who's the father of all false religion, Jesus is the father of the fountainhead of all true religion. So Jesus is true. As in Genesis 5, there was one door into the ark, one way into salvation. Jesus says in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is the one way. Jesus is the one way. Genesis 12, as promised to Abraham, that through his offspring there would be a blessing to the nations. Jesus is the blessing to the nations. Revelation 5 say that there will be worshipers from every nation, tribe, and tongue that will worship Jesus. So He is the blessing to all nations. Which is why it's important for people like me to come out here and just tell you this. Because if I believe this to be true and I don't tell you, then I'm keeping a blessing from you, and that's really evil and awful of me. So I want you to hear the blessing and know about it. Exodus 1, He covers us with His blood. Like I said before, He's our covering. He's the way of escape, though. Now we have a way past this wall. Now we can actually get to God. And the story of the tabernacle. He is God. He is the unblemished substitute sacrifice, and He's the high priest. So He is all of these things. He is our mediator. Paul tells Timothy that there can be but one mediator between God and man, and that is the man Jesus Christ. So He is our mediator. He is a forever king. If you're wondering where Jesus is right now, He is in heaven, seated at the right hand of the throne of the Father. He is a forever king on a forever throne. Just as we were talking about in Isaiah, 800 years after Isaiah, after this promise of what the deliverer would look like, He provides healing. So He's a healer. He provides healing. So this is really the story of the Bible. And I'm not out here to start any arguments. I'm just really here to really tell you what the Bible basically teaches in a very short, quick time frame. If you have any questions about this, or if you're interested in finding out more about it, you can go to our website, ReachUNC.org. This presentation in a more clean, kind of spread out PDF form is there. You can download it. And actually, this will be on video there as well. So get more information from there. And if you want to talk about anything or anything else, I'll be here. Thanks for listening.